Avoiding those expensive FPL premiums and buying those cheaper alternatives who offer amazing FPL value is a strategy that all FPL managers need to take a look at. And in this video, I am going to deep dive specifically into those premiums and the ones that you need to maybe look elsewhere with. So as always, if you look forward to today's video, please do drop a like, aim for 200. And of course, if you're not already, make sure you do subscribe for daily fantasy content. Enough waffling, let's get into today's video. So I know that this sort of video might get a little bit controversial because end of the day, premiums are in FPL for a reason. They are usually the highest point scorers and the best players in the league. So I need to make sure that I caveat this video by saying this. I do not think we should be completely avoiding all FPL premiums. In particular, long term. I think naturally, longer term, the FPL premiums become premiums for a reason because they consistently deliver. However, I really think there is a strategy that managers need to consider where a lot of people are talking about doing an early wildcard, maybe around game week 4 even. We can take a look at the fixtures here for those teams that we will be targeting with those premium assets. At Arsenal, we are specifically looking at Bukayo Saka. Man City, of course, Erling Haaland. Liverpool, Mo Salah. Spurs is going to be Son, and Chelsea's Cole Palmer. So again, if we're looking at a 6, 7, 8 game week horizon, then realistically, no, I'm not looking at avoiding all FPL premiums. But for a short period of time, those opening 3 game weeks, I really do feel like there is alternatives out there that not only are going to, tick along nicely, I really think they could match those premiums that you can see in the corner there that I have mentioned. And I just want to go over a quick overview before we deep dive into those premium assets and the alternatives that you need to consider for your teams. I'm telling you, I'm not doing this just for content. I really do believe in this sort of FPL logic here. So first up, I just want to say, Palmer and Saka, 0 minutes in pre-season. The players that we're looking at right now, those are the ones I'm really concerned about. I know that Palmer played under Maresca in the Man City youth team, and I fully expect Cole Palmer to return to that Chelsea team. But if I'm paying 10.5 million for a player who also has Man City at home in game week 1, I want to make sure that he is coming into that team and playing 90 minutes regardless. And in that position on the right wing, Noni Madueke has been very, very good for Chelsea. So I don't think it is a no-brainer that Cole Palmer just walks in and plays 90 minutes in game weeks 1, 2 and 3. Saka, on the other hand, I'm a bit more confident Arteta will just wheel out in game week 1 regardless of his fitness, because we've seen that historically in Arteta's management career. So I'm not worried about Saka's minutes as opposed to Cole Palmer's. The thing that I am worried about Saka with is he's had a very busy season, very busy summer, and coming into these fixtures, is he actually going to be Premier League fit? And that's my main concern with those two off the bat. Haven't seen him at all in pre-season, and I usually like to see whether a player is fully up to fitness with the Premier League being such a physical league. In terms of Man City, obviously Erling Haaland has played loads of minutes in pre-season, so it's very difficult to say why he's a bad option. The reason why I think he's going to be a difficult one to replace at times is because we haven't seen De Bruyne or Foden at all in pre-season, and it's unlikely that they are going to return for the Community Shield, and usually that is a brilliant opportunity for us to really assess those top teams. Sadly, it sounds like neither of those will be available, which makes it very difficult for us to maybe look at any alternative to Haaland in those opening weeks, but of course I will deep dive into that. In terms of Mo Salah, new management at Liverpool, new structure, new systems. Are we actually going to see an effective Mo Salah, what we saw under Jurgen Klopp? That needs to be spoken about. And of course, Spurs are in the market for a forward. We know they are heavily linked with Dominic Solanke. Could we potentially see that being an impact on Son? Again, another unknown. So I wanted to quickly deep dive into that section, give you an overview to say that we are looking very much at the short term here, game weeks 1 to 3 as premium alternatives. If we're looking longer, I think end of the day, the premiums do justify themselves as a 10 game week hold for your sides. So first up, looking at Liverpool and of course the Salah alternative available to us. Now I know Mo Salah has been so popular in a lot of people's FPL drafts, and I do think rightly so, he is the best Liverpool asset. But when we look at Mo Salah at 12.5 million and the alternative that I am going to highlight here, Diogo Jota at 7.5 million, first and foremost, we're making a 5 million saving on his teammate. Now, I've put the underlying numbers here on your screens, but I will be saying that Jota has played a lot less minutes than Mo Salah last season. So Mo Salah's numbers are incredible considering how many minutes he did play last season. XG per 90, 0.76. Of course, penalties were included in that, but end of the day, we're not going to be ruling out penalties as a thing in FPL, so we need to take that into account. But Jota's is something I want to highlight. 0.45 XG per 90, really solid underlying numbers. Shot volume for both is fantastic, 4.04 for Salah, 3.13 for Diogo Jota. And in terms of creativity, we know Mo Salah really did up it last season as being a chance creator as well as a goal scorer for Liverpool. Maybe did actually hinder his goal scoring at times, whereas Jota historically under Jurgen Klopp has been a player that has come in and scored goals, not necessarily been as much of a creator. And end of the day, if I'm paying for a midfielder and he's the goal scorer in that team, that is just an added bonus. So in terms of what I mentioned previously about Liverpool as a general team, going into those opening 3 fixtures, Ipswich away, of course, newly promoted team. Is that going to be as straightforward as we think? Maybe not. Brentford at home, a good fixture, and then Man United away in game week 3. I need to caveat this by saying, if we are looking at long term, no, I do not think Diogo Jota is a better option than Mo Salah over the 6 game weeks, because I think Salah in game week 4, game week 5 is almost essential if you think that he is going to hit the ground running. So if you're looking at a longer term strategy, no, I do not think Jota can cover Mo Salah. However, for those opening 3 fixtures, I do not think they're as easy as a lot of managers are making out. I think game week 1 and game week 3 is tricky. And also with the captaincy options available to us, I think a lot of people are looking at captaining Haaland in game week 2 and game week 3. So if you're on this short-term strategy right now, my question to you is this. If you don't think Mo Salah is a better captaincy option than Erling Haaland, and we don't have absolute guarantees on where Mo Salah is going to operate in this Arne Slot team as opposed to Jota, because if Jota comes in as the forward, is there definitely a case to say he's the better option than Mo Salah and maybe a bigger goal threat? All these question marks need to be answered, and because of that reason, I firmly believe that Diogo Jota is a fantastic alternative to Mo Salah in those opening 3 game weeks, and someone that we need to consider for our teams. As I mentioned, longer term, if you're not looking to wildcard early, then I think you need to go with Mo Salah, because I do think over a 6 game week period, that is where the cream will rise to the top, and Mo Salah will inevitably probably be worth the investment in your FPL teams. But for those first 3, I firmly believe Diogo Jota is a brilliant alternative to Mo Salah. Next up, moving over to Arsenal. And as I discussed, the premium in this team is of course going to be Bukayo Saka, coming in at 10 million. But once again, I really think there is a teammate who is offering fantastic FPL value, and that is going to be Martin Odegaard. 1.5 million cheaper than Saka at 8.5 million. Played loads of minutes in pre-season, had no Euros to contend with because of course Norway didn't qualify. So straight away we're looking at a player here who is arguably as talismanic as Bukayo Saka in this team, and also had a complete summer off, been able to be embedded back into this Arteta system. So as I spoke about at the start of the video, I fully expect Saka to come into game week 1, even if he doesn't play a minute in pre-season. Arteta just has a history of that. But I think there's a big difference between playing and actually being match fit and raring to go. And I really would bet on the fact that Saka isn't fully fit going into game week 1, and we could even see some early substitutions if Arteta is trying to save him for game week 2 in particular. So because of that, firstly, I think our Odegaard's minutes over the opening 3 are going to be better than that of Bukayo Saka's. And if that is the case, then we of course have a penalty taker here straight away that we need to consider for our FPL teams in the absence of Bukayo Saka. Now, in terms of the underlying numbers, it's worth noting Saka does blow Odegaard out of the water in pretty much every single department. We always think about Odegaard as being the chance creator in this Arsenal team, but Saka took that upon himself in last season's campaign as well. So he really was the main man in this Arsenal attack. However, we also need to remember that there was a little bit of indifference in that Arsenal midfield at times, with Odegaard having to play as a double pivot at times to really help build phases through play. I think this season, with the balance that Arsenal are developing, with Calafiori being signed, which is going to help with the ball progression from deep, they might not be as reliant as Odegaard to come deep and connect the midfield to the defence. I think his main reason in this team is going to be operating between the midfield and the attack. And that is where I think we're going to see an improvement in those underlying numbers. Now, again, if we're looking longer term, as opposed to Mo Salah, and how I said if you're going to go long term, you have to go Mo Salah, I look at these 6 fixtures and think to myself, these aren't great long-term fixtures. Game week 2, game week 4, game week 5 are not ideal at all. And if I look at them and think Saka could be a little bit of rotation risk in game week 1, then straight away I'm saying to myself, I want Martin Odegaard over this period. I'm paying less money. I'm getting a talisman in that team. And of course, if the fixtures aren't great, we can even move away from someone like an Odegaard if we really want to. So what I'm trying to say is this. Saka is the better FPL option, but long term, I don't think the fixtures are there to say to ourselves, I'm going to sit on Saka for 6 game weeks in a row. I don't think they're that good. And if you're in a position right now where you're looking to wildcard maybe around game weeks 4 and jump off those Arsenal assets when the fixtures get difficult, I'd then argue for this period here, game weeks 1 to 3, Odegaard is the man that you should be considering for your teams, knowing that beyond game week 6, Saka can come into your team as the long-term Arsenal pick if you truly want to. For those opening 3, I think Odegaard is the pick. Next up, heading over to Chelsea, Maresca's men, and we have got Nkunku as that alternative to Cole Palmer. So a quick reminder, Cole Palmer having a huge FPL price rise to 10.5 million, one of the most expensive midfielders in the game. Nkunku, meanwhile, being demoted from a forward to a midfielder, which from an FPL perspective is fantastic news for us, and also getting a price fall to 6.5 million, so 4 million cheaper than that of Cole Palmer. So I've put the underlying numbers here on your screens for both Cole Palmer and Nkunku, but we have to remember here, Nkunku played so little minutes last season. I believe he played between 300 and 400 minutes. So while the numbers are based on per 90 minutes, it's even more impressive that Cole Palmer is putting up these numbers, considering he played so many minutes from game week 5 onwards for Chelsea. But what we saw from Nkunku last season was positive. We saw decent shot volume, 3.22 per 90, shots in the box, really getting into those goal scoring positions, whereas Palmer's is interesting, only 1.78 shots in the box per 90. Maybe something to highlight for later on this season if Cole Palmer does seem to have a slight drop off, because we know penalties were a huge factor in that 200 plus season. So maybe Cole Palmer, if he doesn't get those penalties, maybe won't be as good of an option. But look, in terms of Chelsea right now, the big thing that I mentioned at the start of the video, we haven't seen Cole Palmer return to Chelsea pre-season yet, and Nkunku has played pretty much every minute for Chelsea, and he is playing very well. Having watched all of the pre-season games, he has been one of the standout performers and has looked really fit and got himself into goal scoring opportunities, and the shot volume has been there for him. So I think right now, at a 4 million saving, this is just too good of FPL value to ignore, especially as I mentioned, and I keep saying it, if you're on a short-term strategy. Game weeks 1 to 3, I actually think aren't ideal at all. City at home is never a good fixture. Wolves away will be a tricky game, with Wolves ever improving under Gary O'Neill. And Palace, we saw in Glasner, had a brilliant defensive record, so I don't think game weeks 1 to 3 are ideal. So one narrative would be just get the best Chelsea asset in Cole Palmer. The other narrative would be avoid Chelsea completely between game weeks 1 and 3. And I'm not against that strategy at all. But if we are looking at premium alternatives, I think based on what we've seen, nothing in Cole Palmer, the positives of Nkunku, and if a player is going to skyrocket in price, it probably would be someone like an Nkunku. Even if you're not for those Chelsea opening fixtures, and I don't think you need to be, I do think Nkunku is a brilliant alternative to Cole Palmer, and I think rightly so, between game weeks 1 and 3, he is a great option for your teams, as opposed to Palmer, knowing that later on in those early fixtures, game weeks 4 to 6, if we're looking to use that wild card and Palmer comes back into that team and looks electric, we can bring him back in as our sole premium midfielder if we choose to. But I think Nkunku is a brilliant pick at 6.5. So next up, heading over to Spurs, and of course their premium being Son. So with Liverpool, I've spoken about, I really do think Jota can cover Salah over those opening game weeks. I obviously think in terms of Arsenal, I think Odegaard can cover Saka, and I do think Nkunku can do the business against Cole Palmer. This is going to be the first one where I don't feel as confident about it. So Kulusevski is the man that I'm picking as the alternative, but it's worth noting we also have Maddison at 7.5 million and Brennan Johnson at the same price as Kulusevski at 6.5 million. But the thing that is making me interested about Kulusevski is the fact that he has been playing as a forward in pre-season. Now, of course, we know there has been a lot of rumours about Dominic Solanke being signed for Spurs, but even if they do sign him in the last week of the transfer window, are we expecting him to come straight into the team? My argument is probably not. So I think what we're seeing in pre-season is Ange playing with the players that he has available to him. And Kulusevski has been that man in that number 9 system. So first up, taking a look at the underlying numbers, it's worth noting nobody comes close to Son. XG per 90, 0.39. In terms of Kulusevski, 0.16. The shot volume isn't as good. The creativity isn't necessarily as good in terms of the expected assists. So I really want to sit here and say that I actually don't think there is a great alternative to Son at Spurs based on the numbers that we are looking at. However, I do think if we get Kulusevski as a number 9 in those opening 2 fixtures against Leicester and Everton, and maybe even as a bit of a game week 3 option if he is going to be maybe that Harry Kane option that drops deep and connects those wide men in the shape of Brennan Johnson and Son. I think if you can get Kulusevski as a 9 for those opening 3 fixtures, I really do think he offers brilliant value. Now, I am going to say this, in terms of the longer term fixtures, I don't actually think Son is a premium option in general. I've spoken about it with Salah. I think he's a long-term premium pick you can go for. I think Saka isn't because of those fixtures. And I'm going to put Son under the same bracket. Even though the numbers are good, I think long-term, I would not be having him as a premium asset in my team. However, as we've spoken about, if we're looking at short-term, the fixtures are good for Spurs. I think even Newcastle away, they do have the tools available to hurt them. And then I start to say to myself, 3.5 million cheaper, could I get Kulusevski playing as the number 9 in this Spurs system? I think the answer could be yes. So I'm a little bit less confident on this one because Kulusevski playing in a different position. But what I've seen in pre-season has been positive. And I do think if you want a piece of that Spurs attack, you can't avoid Son. Maybe Kulusevski is your man. Let me know your thoughts in the comments on this one, because this one could be a little bit controversial. So last up, of course, it is going to be Man City, and we need to look at those potential Erling Haaland premium replacements, because I'm going to put it out there, I don't think there is one at Man City right now, and this is the big factor that we need to remember. So I've got Oscar Bob as a comparison here at 5 million. It's worth noting, I don't think it's a good comparison because Haaland's a forward, Oscar Bob's a midfielder. We have no real guarantees if Bob plays, but the alternatives to Oscar Bob is the shape of Jack Grealish, but I just don't really think we get that excited by Jack Grealish as an option for FPL teams. As I mentioned, De Bruyne and Foden both haven't been available in pre-season, and De Bruyne's only just come back to pre-season, so we might not even see them this weekend in the Community Shield. So when I look at that, I think to myself, is that actually an alternative to Erling Haaland? And I think that's the big question that we need to ask ourselves. So look at the numbers right now. I think we're just going to avoid Erling Haaland in terms of his numbers. The reason being is we know they're ridiculous. 1.04 XG per 90 is just enough to be said. But I want to look at Oscar Bob's because I can't come to any conclusions what we've seen here. He played so little minutes last year, but did get a goal and 2 assists. But the thing that I want to say is Pep's actually been leaning on him for minutes during pre-season. Now, I know, of course, he hasn't had his big boys available to him, Bernardo Silva, for example, but I do think that right-hand side of Man City and the fact that they've now sold Julian Alvarez gives an opportunity for Oscar Bob to truly have a breakout season this year. I think with him, he can play on the right or he can play in the 10, and I don't think either of those have been locked down yet in this Pep Guardiola system. And based on the minutes that I've spoken about with Foden and Kevin De Bruyne getting 0, I think there's an opportunity for Oscar Bob really to step up in these opening 3 fixtures. Again, Chelsea away in game week 1 is a good option for Oscar Bob if we get an understanding that he will be available. And if you can get a piece of him in game week 2, what an unbelievable differential we are looking at there. Now again, the whole purpose of this video is looking at premium alternatives. Can you pick Oscar Bob as an alternative to Erling Haaland? The answer is no. And this is the big thing that I want to highlight in terms of all the players that I've been looking at. I feel like each team, Salah, Saka, Son, Palmer, they have had alternatives available to them that even if you don't fully agree with it, they could have the ability to match those premium counterparts. I think this is the first one that I'm looking at right now where I can say to you, I do not think Oscar Bob gets anywhere near Erling Haaland. And for those managers that are maybe looking at doing no Haaland in their FPL teams, I look at those fixtures and think, game week 1, we've spoken about it. I do think Salah or Alexander Isak is going to be the captaincy pick, but you can't tell me no one's going for Haaland in game week 2. And in game week 3, obviously Liverpool away against Man United, Man City away against West Ham, I think that's a perfectly fine captaincy pick again. If we're looking at the short term, and even game week 4 at home against Brentford, I don't think there is any Man City option at the time of recording that can match him. Now, if in the Community Shield we see Phil Foden and Kevin De Bruyne come into the team, then this completely changes the conversation because we actually have alternatives available. But I think it'd be wrong of me to put Foden on the screen right now and say to you, you can cover Haaland with Foden, because we can see a situation where he doesn't play game week 1, gets minimal minutes in the Ipswich game, and then comes back into game week 3. And the damage could be done then by the time that you've avoided Erling Haaland. So what I want to conclude here is this. I think Haaland is the one premium that actually doesn't pose an alternative to him that could realistically match him. And that is my big worry without going with Erling Haaland, is I just don't think anybody can actually come close to him in this Man City team if De Bruyne and Foden aren't available. But I do want to raise the awareness for Oscar Bob, because maybe Haaland and Oscar Bob in your team could really attack those opening 3 fixtures. Okay guys, so just to give you a bit of a last overview, conclusion, whatever you want to call it, I know that premium options are the talk of the town right now, and saying that there are alternatives available is a controversial subject. But as I mentioned, and I really want to drill it down here, if you are looking at a wildcard 4 and you're only looking at game weeks 1 to 3, I think, for example, Saka, Palmer are risks because they played 0 minutes during pre-season. So I don't think it is out of the realms of possibility that alternatives are available to them. I think Odegaard is historically a great option and has played the minutes. And Nkunku has played the minutes in pre-season. So I've seen enough right now to be pretty confident that Saka and Palmer do have alternatives available to them. As I mentioned, I do not think Son has an alternative in this Spurs team. I think if you get lucky with Kulusevski, then you've done really well. But I don't think you can get anyone that covers Son in those opening few fixtures. And as I mentioned, do I think Salah is a better option than Diogo Jota? Absolutely. And I do think over the first 6 game weeks, if you're not looking to wildcard, just go for Mo Salah. It is the right move. But if you're like me and you're looking at a game week 4 wildcard, I look at the opening 3 and I think I might not captain Salah in any of those fixtures. And then it begs the question, is it worth spending 12.5, or can I just go for the 7.5 million option in Jota? While his minutes might be a little bit less, we expect him probably to start in game week 1, and if he does well, start in game week 2. And then come game week 4, I can look to bring in Salah for those brilliant fixtures. So I think they are comparable in my opinion, but I know that's controversial. And finally, as I discussed, I just do not think there is anybody that comes close to Erling Haaland in this Man City team. Of course, if Foden and De Bruyne do emerge as options, then yes, this completely changes the conversation. And I probably am then sitting here saying, go for Mo Salah as your premium, avoid Haaland. But unfortunately, that information isn't available to us, and I don't think it will be come game week 1. And for that reason, I think Haaland is the premium that I'm most scared of all of these not to own in my team. So let me know your thoughts in the comments, guys. In general, which of these premiums are you looking at maybe going as an alternative? Yes guys, okay, so that's going to wrap up today's video. As I mentioned, this isn't a clickbaity video. I honestly do believe in this strategy. If you are looking at game weeks 1 to 3, I firmly believe that there are some alternatives to the premiums that you can go for that are going to be slight differentials that eventually when you wildcard into these premiums, you've got those returns in the opening week. So a little bit controversial, but I really love to know your thoughts in the comment section. As always, it's important to think a little bit differently to other FPL managers. So if you enjoyed today's video, please do consider dropping a like and of course smashing that subscribe button for daily fancy content. We're just over a week away. I cannot wait to bring you content this season. Have an amazing day, guys. Take care, and we'll talk really, really soon. Cheers.